Happy New Year. It is the Nick Handley Show, the Nick Handley Podcast. You get the podcast wherever you get your podcasts on Spotify. Be sure to subscribe to the Husker Max YouTube channel where you can get all of the Nick Handley Show episodes. And again, wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple, and beyond. I want to wish everybody a very happy New Year. We're recording this the day before New Year's Eve, so otherwise things might get a little bit rowdy. There's a reason I did this on the 30th, because if I do this on the 31st, the guest that I'm about to bring on, who knows what we would have in front of us as we are ringing in the new year. But I am very happy to be talking with a longtime guest of the shows, whether it was on 590 or 1620, and now his debut on the podcast. Michael Bruntz of Husker247 Sports does the great work, and that fantastic team at Husker247 Sports. Now, Bruntsy, I wore this hat in honor of you, and I don't know if you can tell the logo. Here, I'll try to get it up a little closer.
Get it where I can see you.
Can you?
I can't. I got nothing. What is it?
Okay. Well, this happened. I've got the TPC Harding Park.
Oh, there you go.
And because when I was out that way a couple years back, you were essentially my tour guide via text. You were the one telling me where to go. And didn't you actually do some work out at TPC Harding Park? Or you went up there quite a few times. You worked nearby.
I worked near there. I worked. I could see it through the fence from kind of the office. So I don't think I ever played there because it was. Okay. It got really expensive. Like an approachable Muni course to hosting President's Cups and stuff. So
I don't know the facility there. So when we went there, and this was right after they had the COVID PGA Championship, the facility itself was very underwhelming. Now the course was beautiful, but as far as the clubhouse, I could see where you would say a Muni type course because it's a city course, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, it is. I'm trying to think because it's a city course, and they dumped a ton of money into it. And like I said, I never played it. I think I walked around one year. They had the President's Cup there.
Yeah.
In like 2010, 2009.
That sounds right. Because I think that was the COVID PGA Championship was the first major, but yes, I think they did a President's Cup there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You're jogging my memory. Yeah. It's not bad, but I think you could probably spend a couple $100 and, play somewhere else in California if you wanted to.
Yeah. I don't know what do they call those trees? The
cypress?
Cypress trees.
Cypress Hill. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Those are fantastic. Those were sweet. And you know what? Sometimes they'll knock a ball back in bounds and back in play, which was cool. But it's been a while since you and I have had a chance to chat and to chop it up a little bit. But you just got back from the Big Apple, and there's a lot to take away from Nebraska's 20-15 Bad Boy Mowers Pinstripe Bowl victory. But the 20-15 victory is indeed that. It's a victory, and it puts Nebraska at 7-6. So I want to start right there, Bruntsy.
Okay.
7-6 compared to what maybe could have been a 6-7 season. I know the obvious answer is, well, yeah, that's different because one is a losing record, one is a winning record. But does the game itself, does that seventh win, does that bowl victory, does that change your view of this season in its entirety?
It's a nice capper. I don't know. I mean, I'll say this: 7-6 makes the offseason a heck of a lot easier than 6-7. I mean, it sets up a much different conversation throughout the offseason of, okay, you've got like this kind of ground level that you're building from now where, you know how it is around here. I mean, you especially with the way that game played out, if Nebraska would have found a way to ended up on the losing side of that game, you would have felt like the sky's falling a little bit. I mean, Nebraska was in control of that game. I never felt like it was really out of hand until you got to the blocked punt late. But, it just makes things a little bit lighter around here. I mean, 2015 was the last time they won a bowl game. I mean, that's just insane. And then you see it scrolling on ESPN, and that they broke the bolus streak and everything else. So you end up feeling pretty good about it. I mean, I think that's the big thing. And I think it probably changes the narrative a little bit on next season for what kind of this means for Matt Rule and his staff. I mean, you've reset the deck on offense and defense with your coordinators. You've got your quarterback back, which in the year of our Lord 2024 feels like a big deal if you're able to keep a quarterback year to year. And I think that's a good place to build from going into the offseason. So yeah, it's 7-6. I think it shouldn't maybe feel like a huge deal, but walking out of Yankee Stadium, it sure felt like that kind of eased a lot of it was a little bit of aloe on the wounds, I guess, from kind of how November played out for Nebraska for the most part.
It's funny, and you bring up 2015. That was such a mixed season because there was that debacle in West Lafayette, but then the subsequent night against Michigan State that turned out to be a college football playoff team that Nebraska wins, maybe somewhat controversial, but they did win that game.
Yep.
And I remember Nebraska's a 5-win team with the academic performance rate. They qualify for the Foster Farms Bowl and they beat UCLA. And Bruntz, if you remember that in that game and that win, I think a lot of people it was a first year for Mike Riley, so people were still on the fence if he was even the right hire to begin with. But in a similar way, I think even that win got people a little bit more optimistic about the following year, a little bit more enthusiastic about the following year. And like you just said about the quarterback, you had your quarterback coming back in Tommy Armstrong too. I never thought that Foster Farms Bowl victory in a team that was entering that bowl at 5 wins would have any lingering effect in the offseason. And maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was in a bubble on my own. I felt like that win against UCLA in the Foster Farms Bowl, it gave them a little renewed vigor. It gave the offseason a little bit more pep in the step, if you will.
Yeah, and it's interesting now that kind of thinking back, I didn't make this connection until you were just saying this, but the way that each of those games kind of played out too. I mean, Nebraska really kind of leaned on UCLA on the ground, and it was never really, that game never really felt like it was in doubt either. I mean, it was kind of like, in 2025 was like, they finally got whatever was out of their system with the Hail Mary game and, everything else. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a heck of a lot more change going into this offseason than what that team faced. But that one, it felt like it was like, okay, it was a little bit of a house money game. You probably shouldn't even have been there, but you went there, you played well, and you came out with a win. This one, I don't know. I mean, I just think with the nature of college football now, I mean, I'll throw the question back at you. How does your lens and the way that you view like year to year change based on NIL, transfer portal, everything else? Because it feels to me like you come out of that game and you're almost, rather than just like the whole team, you're kind of just forced to kind of pick at little pieces of like, this is who I'm excited about. This is another guy, rather than like, the whole offense or whatever. I mean, it's just a much different offseason conversation, I think, than what Nebraska's had to engage in part because they haven't been to a bowl game in forever. But it's just, I think it forces a different kind of conversation in January coming out of a game like that.
Oh, and you're right. I totally agree with that. And a couple things on that, Brunsey, is there's the part of the roster of still knowing that that's a work in progress, still knowing that you hope, and we'll get into this a little bit later on the work to do in the transfer portal, but a lot of guys that are eligible to come back, will those guys necessarily be in the same spot that they're in? Will they be in a Nebraska uniform? You can still transfer, even though the window's closed, you can still transfer. There's going to be, we know that there's still going to be some moving and shaking that's going to happen. Nebraska's going to add some guys to the roster too. They're going to have to. So it is different because as much as you want to say, hey, we know these guys from an eligibility standpoint can come back, we don't know if they'll be back. And if they are back, will they be in line to start, because who might be coming in to replace them out of the transfer portal? So just getting the true feel of the roster is, you're absolutely right, is a lot different than what it was in 2015. I'm with you though. I look at, hey, you got the number one person to stick around in Dylan Raiola. You're working your tail off to keep guys like Ja'Cory Barney. You get Emmett Johnson to come back out of the transfer portal, and he has a nice game. There are a lot of areas where you feel confident that this guy will be back, this guy will be back, and this guy is going to have a bigger role. And this guy, like Donovan Jones, what he was able to do as a guy who redshirted, knowing that, damn, he got a big taste of college football in a bowl game too, and a lot of people are talking about him now. That's exciting too. So you're right. You take pieces from that roster and what you saw against Boston College and say, okay, this is what I like. The other part about this that I totally forgot, and you were watching this in the press box, and I don't know if you've had a chance to watch any of the actual broadcast itself. And I think a lot of Nebraska fans that watch this in their homes or at bars where the sound was on is you forget how powerful, whether we're talking about the Bad Boy Mowers Bowl or Pinstripe Bowl, or we're talking about the Cotton Bowl, is that endorsement of your program, that 3.5 hour PSA for your program and the things that you did to get to it, and the things that you are going to do to go even further, and the head coach and all the great storylines. I mean, that's what it is. There's a game going on, and that's what we tune in for. But you forget about all of the positive storylines and the publicity, the positive publicity that every program gets when they have that stage alone. And you have a Saturday morning, 11 a.m. broadcast, kind of felt like college football. It's a triple header on ABC, so you're excited about that. You kick things off. It was a good spot for Nebraska, and I almost forgot how really positive that can be for a program, especially when you can tell the Nebraska story on where they're positioned from name, image, likeness, what they've done so far in the transfer portal, which was brought up a few times. Matt Rule and what he does in the year 3. This is year 2, so he's right on schedule with what he did at the previous places at Temple and Baylor. So all of that stuff was brought back to a national audience. So in case you forgot, like after that win against Colorado, you were reminded of, oh, here's where Nebraska's going. Here's the trajectory of the program, which is nothing but a positive.
Well, and I mean, that's not even mentioned. They had a DJ on the back of a riding lawnmower in the stadium.
Did you try to get on there, by the way?
They would not let us anywhere near the field, which was probably fine. It was a slop fest, but
coming from an A's fan and BC being a Twins fan, God knows what you would have done on that field, which I would have endorsed too if I were there.
Giambi was safe.
I'm glad Brett Gardner's not there anymore.
No, I mean, and the fact that it was on ABC, I mean, that was unique. I mean, it's not like the game was like hidden on ESPN2 at 11 a.m. Like that was a primo spot.
Yeah.
Just for exposure purposes. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure for a casual that was sitting there on a Saturday morning flipping through, you see Nebraska on there. I mean, you probably stop and see what's going on. It didn't hurt that, Nebraska's got some good storylines. They played okay for the most part in that game. I mean, I think there's a lot that you can kind of take out of that. And just for the roster, I mean, it felt more like, I think you kind of have to recalibrate your thinking nowadays to think of it this way. That bowl game was more about 2025 than it was about 2024. I mean, there's great storylines with all the seniors that have been there for so long. Ty Robinson, Bryce Benhart, those guys that have, really kind of crawled through it for Nebraska for 6 years and done a lot of good things. Finally got that, that nice send off, but it's much the feeling of guys coming out of that locker room after the game as they're, trying to find lighters to smoke cigars in the Yankees locker room, and they're getting their suitcases and heading off to wherever they're going. Yeah. You could kind of get the sense of momentum going into the off season. Like, I think that's the thing to kind of take away from it, or at least I did. You did kind of have the Ben Harts and the Robinsons and Ramir Johnsons, which is a great storyline. But, how was that game going to spring you into 25? And I think that kind of fits more into what you're saying, which is you basically had a 3.5 hour infomercial, and you actually played okay football in it too, which, that's not something that Nebraska's really excelled at over the last 7 years, is playing good football when you're on a somewhat large stage.
And that's the part about everything that played out on Saturday, it was hard to ignore how excited the announcers would get when they got a chance to talk about all of those different storylines from the seniors from the previous team. That was brought up a few times, that Matt Rule and his wife paid for to get there for their ticket to put them up at a hotel, all of those things. If you're a TV producer doing one of these games, Matt Rule teams, I realized in this bowl game too, are perfect because Matt Rule is going to give you a lot of storylines. And this isn't to say it's disingenuous. This is just who he is. He's a guy that he's an outside the box thinker, but I think he relishes these moments where he can really promote his program, but also the things that he does that I think he legitimately cares about it. And the thing about it is maybe the biggest storyline, I don't even think maybe the biggest storyline, we didn't learn till after the game about Ramir's mother.
Yeah.
And, that would have been a huge part of what Ramir Johnson, because as he's carrying the football and getting that critical fourth down pickup to ice the game away, they're just talking about, oh, the New Jersey guy. How great is that? How great is that? Well, did you hear what happened to his mom in November too? So I feel like for what Nebraska is trying to get accomplished when it comes to making that program with what they do on the field, but also off the field, an attractive place for transfers, high-end transfers that you and I both know this program still needs to get those types of playmakers. There was nothing about Saturday that threw a wrench into that, in my opinion.
No, I don't. I think, like I said, I mean, we're recording this on the 30th. I mean, the portal dead period ends on the 1st. I mean, Nebraska is going to be back working full time to put that roster together for next season in 48 hours and lining up visits and hitting the road soon in January as they get close to the second signing day. So that's why, I mean, I do think you have to, like, the 24 season it's ended, but like you just immediately roll into the next year now. That's how you have to do it. And I mean, there's a lot of work left for Matt Rule and his staff. I mean, during the bowl practices, Dana Holgerson's asked, well, what's, how much of what you're going to see in the bowl game is going to be kind of your offense, and how much of your stamp are you putting on that? And if he says, he says, I haven't really even thought of that yet. I mean, like, just kind of wrapping your head around the fact that, like, not only are you having to add players to your roster for next season, you got to figure out what the heck this offense is going to look like, what the defense is going to look like, how the heck you're going to fix special teams, which Matt Rule says needs a complete overhaul, which I agree, by the way.
Yes.
I've
been looking at my phone all day, by the way. Have we gotten any emails yet?
There's a lot of work to be done. And, it started the second they got back on that bus in the Bronx to head for the airport. So, I don't know. It's funny. I mean, like, you kind of build up bowls for so much for a month, and then, like, the second it's done, it's like, okay, like, we're moving on. Like, let's go 25.
I was having this conversation with my friends that I was watching the game with on Saturday, and I found myself getting caught up into a lot of the storylines, the ones that we've covered on a daily basis. And I found myself, hey, they're talking about, Key and Isaiah, who I'm blanking on the Cal receivers.
Isaiah Hunter.
Thank you. Hunter and Key, and thinking about, are those guys got to be watching this game right now and watching Dylan and watching him slinging it to Jamal Banks, be like, hey, all right, cool. Watching the defense try to establish that identity, regardless whether it's Tony White as your defense coordinator or if it's John Butler. You're watching those guys ball out. I'm watching Vincent Shavers, and I remember saying, is this the next great linebacker at Nebraska? Is he on the fast track to be one of those great linebackers that we've seen, the Levante David type guys after the type of game he is having? And then I had to catch myself, and I'd tell these guys this, and they were in the same boat as I was. I said, I don't care what this offseason looks like. I don't care who they pull out of the transfer portal. I refuse to do anything more than 7 wins. This year I went on, I thought it was going to be 8 wins. I think the year before I said 7 wins. Yeah. Hell, I might be crazy to go anything more than 6 wins yet. Bruntzy, I can't let myself get into that. And this is where we start to tell ourselves that And then the next months start to
You're just
stretch that. Yeah.
Little Kool-Aid, just a
You're
little
like,
Kool-Aid
oh,
in there.
man, actually, that's different, though, than it was a year ago. Oh, you know what? I can't do it, okay? So as God is my witness and as you is my witness, you're basically right there next to God. Don't let me do it, okay? If we're talking in July, just remember this date. Don't let me go more than 6.
Well, the way the calendar generally falls, once you start getting the fall practice, not you, I'm guilty of this too, but like you start getting like the second week of fall practice, and you're like, maybe I was a little game low on my win projection that I had coming out of spring
I was
ball.
too. I said all last year it was going to be a 7-5 team. Then when it came down to it, I'm like 8-4, baby. Mark it.
I know. I had 8-4 in the 8-4 camp's defense. It probably should have been 8-4. Like,
no, you're right. You're right.
That's what I'm going to hang my hat on.
At least 8-5.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I think you have to fight that, and I don't know. It's probably a little bit early to start doing the game by game of what this is going to look like.
We got time. Do you want to do it? We could do it.
You've got 2 more portal windows. You've got the portal window in the spring. You're going to have, grad transfers and stuff after that. Yeah, I don't know when the appropriate time is to start predicting, but it's probably not now.
No.
But I think it's okay to maybe just based on what you might have seen, just a little sprinkle of Kool-Aid powder in there's okay.
And there was more than some of that, I think, in the Pinstripe Bowl, because I mentioned Vincent Shavers was just a man on a mission. I mean, he was wreaking havoc in that game, which was great to see because he's a guy that's played enough snaps as a true freshman to where he should feel like he's moved on to that next year.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought he played like that, extremely disruptive in his athleticism. And you always hear the coaches talking about how much he just flat out loves the game. And then, another guy from Miami who, again, is a major part of this. And I think Dana Holgorsen is absolutely salivating having a guy like that in Ja'Cory Barney. But Donovan Jones, that was awesome to see. It's hard for me to decide whether, okay, that is something that I really need to be excited about, or is it given the circumstances? This is the thing that people will bring up about bowl games of how invested is everybody into it? Was he getting truly tested or not? I thought he passed the eyeball test. He looked very, very good. And then I also look at what Emmett Johnson, and this is nothing new for Emmett Johnson, in my opinion. Emmett Johnson has given you enough glimpses of where you're thinking, like that run where he leaves a guy hanging in air in the backfield.
Yep.
And you were at the game, so it goes from your normal cheers to the collective, oh.
Yeah, you're the, oh.
That was fantastic. And he's given you those moments. If he can put all of that together, he's a guy that I feel like I just can't quit. I cannot quit Emmett Johnson. Dylan letting it loose a lot more, and Dylan having a little bit of piss and vinegar in that game too. Again, like Vincent Shavers, he's played enough games. He should have that. So a lot of positive things that I think you take from that game. But the one that I want to get your thoughts on here, I like Heinrich Haarberg at tight end. Heinrich Haarberg, especially his blocking.
Yeah.
And what type of athlete he is. Boy, that's something, especially depending on if Fedoni might have a decision to make about the next level. Ooh, the Haarberg thing, I gotta weather my expectation, because at least for 4 quarters, especially having him in motion and being able to crash down, just his physicality, that was fun to see.
Yeah, he didn't look out of place. I mean, no. I think he didn't look like a quarterback trying to be split out as a wideout. I mean, I think that's probably the biggest compliment you can give a guy who's 3 weeks into that switch, 4 weeks into that switch. So yeah, I mean, you kind of think like, what does that look like with a full off season and a long runway to improve? I don't know. I don't know if he's like a traditional inline tight end. And the other guy that I think warrants mentioning in this conversation, who I believe Dana Holgorsen absolutely loves, just based on how much he's played and
Yeah,
how
I
he's
know where you're going.
played, is Luke Lindenmeyer.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
And again, noticing it, and sorry to cut you off there, but
yeah,
also the perimeter blocking.
yeah,
Lindenmeyer was just like Harburg coming on the inside. A lot of those swing passes, a lot of those when they were trying to set up a little bit of the smoke screens, if there was perimeter blocking, you're seeing 44 out there, and he was usually engaged and engaged for a while.
yeah. And just what's coming down, kind of coming up the depth chart next. I think it's going to be a lot of Harburg. It's going to be a lot of Lindenmeyer. We'll see what Fedoni decides to do. So yeah, I think there's a lot of pieces that, the benefit of bringing Dana in for the last 3 regular season games too, was you basically got to put guys through the paces to see who could do what he wants to do and who can't. He loves Emmett Johnson. There's no
Yeah.
question about that. I think his skill set really matches what works for a running back in that offense. I think, Ja'Cory Barney is going to be a great weapon for him. I think obviously they needed more help at wide receiver, and that's why you already have seen the portal ads that they've done. But there's, pieces here and there on that offense that I think they really like now, going into 25. But yeah, I thought I don't think they asked a ton of Harburg, but what they asked him to do, he didn't look out of place by any means. I thought that looked pretty good.
Yeah, I what you said about the little time that he's had at that position, looking the part, and given the fact that he's got that speed, if they can season him a little bit more, what that might look like. But again, these are all those things that we will wait and see. Bruntzy, if I would have said 6-6 at the beginning of the season, even with a bowl win, I know personally I would have said it's not a successful season. They got to hit 7. Now they hit 7 with the postseason, but context is always very, very important. I've asked this question a lot here in the last month since just the regular season wrapped up with the loss to Iowa. And that was, would you consider 2024, year 2 under Matt Rule, a success? If you would have told me everything played out the way it did, just from a number standpoint, I would have said there's no way that's a success. I've changed my tune because of this, because Matt Rule showed something that he's not willing to let things ride out until the end of the season. If he has to make drastic changes, he will.
Yeah.
What he did at OC is unprecedented. Coaches in the college game just don't do that on a regular basis. And that could have blown up in their face.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the low productive games like Iowa, and even to some extent the bowl game, that offense looked different, whether people want to admit it or not. I get it. Well, at the end of the day, you're looking at the scoreboard, but you could see confidence in what those guys were doing. And you brought up like a Lindenmeyer, even a Bonner, and different guys that Dana Holgorsen was able to seek out and say, hey, I think this guy could be used more than he currently is. That could have been disastrous, and it wasn't. So the fact that he was able to salvage it, because if they don't make a bowl game, the conversation we're having right now is a very, very uncomfortable one. And I don't want to make it sound like it's all sunshine and rainbows right now. But what it is it is much better than what it looked like it was going to be after that UCLA loss.
Yeah. 6-6. I would not. It's a step forward. Getting the bowl practices was the most important thing. I know some people roll their eyes at that, but when you consider as a program, Nebraska's basically missed out on about 100 practices over this bowless streak. That's basically like you didn't have spring ball for 7 years. Like that's
That's something.
That matters. But I don't know. I think it's hard to not look at the way that this season played out and feel like you didn't you left some shots out on the course. I think is probably the best way I can say it. You probably should have beaten a good Illinois team at home. You had the throw there to make, missed the field goal. The UCLA game, I think, was probably the biggest head scratcher of the year to me. With the way that played out, it felt like USC was there for the taking. Yep. And I think small progress was made in the one score game issue, which is a big thing. Certainly the Iowa game, the way that played out was terrible. So that's what I say. I mean, when like I don't feel badly about saying that 8-4 was, that was an 8-4 team at the start of the year. I mean, that was you had a top 25 defense again, some better playmakers on offense, and you weren't able to take advantage of that. So, I think it ended on a good trajectory. And I agree. I think you do have to give Matt Rule credit. Somebody who very much, and he even said this in postgame the other day, we have a plan. We know how this is going to work. And, coming into Nebraska, I think he had a very clear direction in his mind of how he was going to put this thing together and how they were going to make those gradual steps. But you've also had the transfer portal drastically change. NIL has been, wasn't part of the college game when he was in it the last time. He didn't have a bunch of transfers to bring in with him. He's had to adapt to a lot of things on the fly. And I think your point is a good one, that you have to give him credit for being willing to make hard decisions that we have seen coaches at Nebraska not make when they needed to be made, and therefore have kind of set things back a little bit, and whatever progress there was to be made. So, yeah, I mean, going and essentially demoting your offensive coordinator in the middle of the season and going to somebody that wasn't even in your program, I mean, that's a huge move, but it was one that needed to be made. I mean, I think he's, seen what the rest of us have seen on special teams, and that there needs to be significant changes made there, whatever that's going to be, in the next few days, maybe. We'll see, but that's another area that has to be addressed. So, yeah, I mean, I do think I think you can take progress out of this year. I think you can also kind of feel like maybe should have had 8 wins coming out of the regular season if things go a little bit differently. But this is kind of the stepping stone that his programs make, and next year is a big one to kind of complete that.
Yeah, I mean, it got to that point where is this really going to be another 5-win team with all of these near misses? And the final tally was 2-6 in 1-score games, but at least you had one in the bowl game where this was something. I don't want to chalk this up to postseason bowl game, where Nebraska was holding on, and they did. They that 4th down conversion with Ramir, that was a huge moment. That so many times everybody, I'm sure, had that collective "you got to be shitting me" when the punt was blocked, of thinking, this game was in control, and now here we are in another 1-score game, and we know how we feel about those. And
you're moving the bingo towel. You're moving the bingo thing on. Like, well, there it is. There's the block kick.
Right. And so that to me was such a
10 block kicks this year, Nick. 10.
I know. That's
10.
That's absurd. That is absolutely absurd. And I'm only being half kidding when I say I've been looking at my phone all day to see if there's any emails coming through of any announcements of changes, because there are a lot of amazing things about the person, and I even think the football mind that Ed Foley is, and we know about them. But if you are willing to do what Matt Rule did during the season, there is no way Ed Foley can be overseeing special teams again. Okay, so we can go ahead and just, I think, put that out there that I think is inevitable. That's a problem. That's a major problem. And it's those things that will still keep me, at least I hope by the time I get to July, will still keep me from going to the 8 or 9 wins, because there are enough things about this team that are going to look a little different and somewhat unfamiliar in an area that I'm going to have to big time see it before I believe it, that got corrected. And that is such an important phase that has really eluded Nebraska for the past handful of years now in special teams. So there's enough there. There's no question about that. But the whole part of after that UCLA game, I was one of the people saying the way this team is playing right now, and you lose that game at home, and you're going into the bye week with that loss, I don't think they get to 6 wins. It was imperative that somehow they did. And it wasn't like they had a murderous stretch of games in front of them, but the way that they were playing, it just did not strike a lot of confidence that they were going to do it. So that became priority number 1. Matt Rule has to get this team to a bowl game, and they did. And so that's why I don't say it was a disappointment. I don't say it was a rousing success, but it was much more successful given the context than if you would have just told me at the beginning of the year this team is going to be a 6-6 team.
Yeah. Well, and it's I remember being asked frequently in August, as you're known to do, about, you know, what's the record prediction? How's this actually gonna play out in a season? And so much of the discussion was, look, if they're gonna get to 6 wins, I mean, they got to get off to a fast start. And if they get off to a fast start and you're predicting 6 or 7 wins, there's going to be some pain down the stretch, like just with the way the schedule was. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I take some, like, looking back, it feels like they played okay football to start the year. I mean, obviously the Colorado game was a big one in terms of just being up for that game, but they played relatively efficiently on offense in terms of not turning the ball over. They weren't explosive by any means, but they kind of did what they needed to do. So I don't know. I mean, I think in some ways, you know, on one hand, I'm saying, well, you know, 6-6, but it's like, well, that's kind of what we said. Like, if you're predicting 6 or 7 wins, it was going to have to be uglier at the end of the year. Just based on them needing to win those early season games. I mean, you know, that's the kind of tough part. I mean, I think you can say they get a passing grade for this year, and they did kind of what they needed to do and got the positives out of it. But I think it's okay to say that, you know, you probably topped a few off the tee box and sprayed some a little wide, you know, on the par threes. So yeah.
I like I like the use of passing grade. I think that's a great way to sum up 2024. You mentioned lack of turnovers, and we know that Dana Holgorsen and Dana Holgorsen and Dylan Raiola are now a package. That's a connection. That is a thing. One didn't want to maybe be around if the other wasn't there, or at least whatever you want to believe with that. So those two, they see eye to eye. They're excited about working with one another, maybe even more so than the Glenn Thomas, Dylan Raiola connection, which I still think is a relatively strong one. It was interesting. He talked about the things that he needs to work on in the offseason, and he talked about his speed, which, sure, there are things there. When you think of where he needs to make the biggest jump from freshman to sophomore year and what that ceiling can ultimately be for him, how do you sum up his freshman year, and what do you look at on what needs to look different for Dylan Raiola in year 2?
Yeah, I think he had a good year. I mean, I think you can't discount the fact that the Big Ten is a tough conference to play as a true freshman in, as a quarterback. You don't see a lot of guys do it. He went through the whole year, played in every game. You know, got beat up against UCLA, came back from that, and you know, I think when you saw the change in coordinator in November, I think you saw a little bit more of kind of what he could do being unlocked, and that's why I'm curious to see ultimately what this offense looks like. Because, I mean, I do think Dana was very careful to kind of stay within the framework of what was being done beforehand. They're not going to come out and run air raid, but I think there's going to be a lot more of kind of the Holgorsen toolbox that you're going to see in that offense next year. I do think that kind of the next step for him is, you know, it's more like the mental of, like, I'm the guy, like, this is my team. If a big throw needs to be made, I'm going to make it. And part of that comes with just being older. Part of it comes with confidence. Part of it comes with being better around him from a talent standpoint. But I mean, the play that he made, you know, the 2 runs that he had in the fourth quarter, I mean, I think those are maybe not runs that he makes against Colorado in a tight game. That felt like progress. It feels like there's a lot more out there for him on the deep balls. Like, that was a part of the offense that I know Nebraska wanted. And part of it was, I don't know how good of a job the wide receivers did this year of winning one-on-ones. Like, that has to get better. But it feels like there's a lot more explosion in that offense for him next year. And I think that's where he can kind of make the biggest jump is, Matt Rule talked about this at his postgame presser in New York, that, that they're going to need Dylan to play well to win games. And that just needs to go to the next level of like bringing everybody along with him. Whereas this year it kind of felt like it was a little bit less of him kind of being at the front of the line. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's a lot about, I go back all the way back to that UTEP game, Bruntzy, and when he connects with both Nayor and Banks, and you're thinking, man, it's okay to embrace the hype. The kids got it. He's just different. And I think none of that has changed for me. I loved how he did. I like that he had to go through the adversity. Now, would have been better if he didn't have to go through a change of offensive coordinator. That would have been okay to avoid in your first year, but he didn't seem to shy away from it at all. And he didn't make excuses. I think as a young person that came in with so many expectations, he seemed to shoulder that load pretty well. And the thing I liked about him in the Pinstripe Bowl is I go back to that piss and vinegar that he had when he gets into the defender's face, when even if it wasn't necessarily a cheap shot late hit, even though it was flagged, he stood up for himself. He got into a guy's face. He was squawking a little bit there towards the end of the game. He was getting into that. He was showing a little bit of that alpha that I think I expect, I'm sure you do too. I expect to see that going forward, what he needs to be that guy. And you bring up a great point, because I think all year long, I've wondered, does Nebraska have that difference maker on the team, especially on the offensive side, where you can say, hey, they need a play, something needs to happen. Trey Palmer effect, where even if you know it's coming, even if you put guys on him, he's still going to beat you. And I think it's natural to look in the backfield at your running back position or off to your left or right and who's at wide receiver. It's okay for it to be the quarterback. Like you said, it's okay for him to be that guy, for him to say, hey, there's a play that needs to be made. Even if a guy is tightly covered, I can still make that throw. And I'm going to make that throw because I'm that good. I think you've seen enough signs of the way he carries himself that he has that in between the ears mentality to do that. This is where I think this offseason for him, from a physical standpoint, is going to be huge. I don't worry about the mental at all. I think he went through what he needed to go through mentally. And so I don't worry about that at all. It's the physical part. I think he's right about his footwork and maybe his speed a little bit, but also that arm strength. He's got a rocket for an arm, but sometimes there's the feathering of the football that we've seen a lot, where you can throw those a little bit more in a line and hit some of those passes. I think that's all going to come, but I think that's the biggest jump, in my opinion, is going to be that physical part of his game. And given the type of attention to detail that he puts into it and the type of people that he works with, it's kind of an exciting prospect to see what he looks like as a sophomore.
Are we talking enough too about the last month or so of the season, the improvement in the running game? Like, I think that piece of it also, I feel like, has the potential to help Dylan a lot. Like, it was so inconsistent through the first couple months of the season. And I don't know that they were doing anything drastically different, but it felt like within the rhythm of calling plays, it was certain runs were being called in spots where they needed to be called. And you saw the success that they had because of some of it was just Emmett Johnson, juking a guy out of his jock. And some of that happened, but it felt like that was just a little bit more dialed in the last month of the season. And I think that can help Dylan a lot. And the other thing too, you talk to his teammates and everybody kind of talks about Dylan's confidence and how it is. He just kind of has that it factor. I think he also was really careful this year to kind of thread the needle on how do you, as a freshman quarterback, lead, but also not get too far ahead of yourself. And I think it's unquestionably going to be his team and his offense in 2025. And I don't know if that was always the case. I felt like he was, willing to lead at times, but also was willing to defer at times too, because I just think he has a good sense of, around him and kind of where he fits into things.
I think that's fair. I absolutely agree with the running back position or the running game element to that too, because that was something I know that Ramir was banged up a little bit. So then you were essentially down to Emmett Johnson and Dante Dowdell. And then in the bowl game, you have no Dante Dowdell because he hits the transfer portal. So you have two running backs, 2.5 if you want to count Quentin Ives. That's no disrespect to Quentin Ives. They just weren't going to use him that much. You got the touchdown. That was great.
Right.
But those are the guys that are going to get the lion's share of the carries. And it just seemed like when I say they, Dana Holgorsen, I would assume Donovan Raiola had something to do with this too. Maybe even Marcus Satterfield. I don't want to rule him out of here, but I think Holgorsen was seeing something. They all came together and they just simplified the running game. They said, hey, I don't care if this guy does this well, this guy does this well. No more of this musical chairs at running back. And were you as confused as I was in the beginning of the season on when they would use certain running backs?
Yeah, no, the use, it always felt like you had the wrong, not always, but it felt like enough that I noticed it where it was like, okay, this is the wrong back for what he's being asked to do. Like that.
Yeah, so at the very least, I feel like they had the right guy in the right moments.
Yes.
And that was an improvement in itself right there. Yeah. And it might have been just as simple as, well, these are the guys we have available. Okay. But you don't have to play all 3 or 4.
Right.
It was so weird. And then the games that we thought, oh man, this could be a really good game for so and so. He wouldn't play, and he was healthy. So I think you're definitely right on that one. Before I let you go, Bruntzy, we know what Nebraska has done in the transfer portal, and again, this is where, as fans, you've got to tamp down a little bit of the excitement because we've been there before. I'll never forget how excited I was when Nebraska got both Casey Thompson. They got also Chubba Purdy. Yeah. And then they got O'Shawn Mathis. And those are top 15 transfer portal guys right there. Nebraska got all 3 of them. How did that next season go? Okay, but they did address on paper, especially at the wideout position, and then he has a body like Kenny Gregory at the rush end position too. They've done some really good things. What is your biggest haul in the transfer portal? Who do you like the most? And what does Nebraska need to do before spring ball opens with that roster?
I say this without hyperbole or hot.
I see you laughing over there.
Is it Kevin Gallick? The long snapper?
You know what? Ain't sexy, but my God, someone who could just snap the ball. Man, Marco Ortiz, God, we love you. You sure you didn't have 2 more years of eligibility left?
So, I
could put him there. That's fine.
I would put him in my top 3.
Okay.
I would put him in my top 3. They needed to get a couple guys on the outside out of at wide receiver, and I think in Hunter and Key, you got 2 guys that were productive, and I think there's kind of two roads. I mean, you got to value production. I think you can also value traits and whatever, but you got to find a balance between the two. I'll say that, but I think the wide receiver spot, they added 2 guys that are going to be, starters or, very strong rotational pieces to what they have right now. And they had to, you mentioned Trey Palmer earlier. I mean, how much difference does Nebraska's offense look this year if you got a guy that it's just going to go and run by somebody at Iowa or is going to run by somebody at USC? Like, I think that was part of the struggle for Dylan this year was a lot of those deep throws were 50-50 balls. Not a lot of, easy completions on deep balls. So I think they did well there. I think kind of a sneaky ad was McCullough, the linebacker from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
When you kind of look at that defense, and I kind of was going through the depth chart for next year mentally after that game. Defensive line, you're going to need find some dudes. Somebody's going to have to step up. Vincent Shavers looks great. They're going to try to get the extra year for Javin Wright. We'll see what happens there. But McCullough is a guy that has played at Oklahoma. has played high level football. Kind of an interesting piece because he was the cheetah. That's the cool name. But South Carolina's got the spur. Oklahoma's got the cheetah.
It's not nearly as cool as the Duck R.
It's not. What was it? The Lobo. That was the 335 piece at New Mexico when Tony White was there. But having that guy that's a little bit more versatile, I think is good, and he's a guy that's really good going forward as a pass rusher.
Yeah.
And I think John Butler is going to be aggressive. I really believe that with his pressure. So that was an important add because that linebacker group is pretty thin. Just kind of where they stand now. So those are the ones that stand out to me most.
Where are you? And I don't want to interrupt you because you didn't mention Williams Nwaneri, but is that going to be more of the intangibles and just the overall physical part of it seem to be there?
That's a traitsy ad. That's a traitsy ad. He's like I mean, size-wise, he's like Randy Gregory. I mean, he's 6'6", 250, just looks like a guy that was born to just wreck pass quarterbacks. Right. Like, we'll see. He was a 5-star kid, and for good reason. But is he going to be dialed in and focused? I think that's a question. But certainly having Jamar Mosey, having guys from his high school program here is going to help him a ton. But I think he's a guy that can be an absolute Trey Palmer type guy on defense. And Nebraska is going to need that because you're going to replace a lot up front, and it's that was a big ad though. I mean, there's no discounting that. I mean, Nebraska's done a really nice job of meeting needs, but when they've had to swing for the fences, I think they've been willing to really kind of swing out of their cleats at things.
So where does Nebraska now need to focus their attention, and what's realistic in your opinion on what they can tackle here in the next wave of the transfer portal?
Well, tackle. I mean, that's a big one. They've hosted offensive tackles throughout December, but so far come up empty on that. I think people need to remember. I mean, I don't think you need to, just start spending money to do it. There's going to be another window. I think Nebraska is going to have a chance to maybe find some guys in January too once the season is truly done. But offensive tackle is a big one. I think, running back's another one that I think, they would probably look at bringing in somebody else if the right guy's there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the tough part about Nebraska in this portal cycle is, that you got to cut down so much to get to the 105. You got to add guys, but there's kind of just need across the board. It's not just, offensive tackle is probably the biggest, but I think if they could add a best available type guy at a few spots, they'd probably do it.
It's going to be, you brought this up earlier. This is the interesting part about the season and the college football season now is we've always talked about it here in Nebraska because regardless of how basketball is doing, and even to some extent baseball, it's always going to be a focal point of how the team is trending, how the roster is building. Now it's a constant addition to the roster or some surprise subtractions. College football is just absolutely a 365-day a year thing now because of all, even with the dead periods, there's no shortage of news with conference realignment and everything like that. For Nebraska, the year 2 to year 3 in Matt Rule is going to be fascinating. It truly is, given the coaches that are in place, the moves that Nebraska to make from that standpoint, to now going into year 2, a very important year 2 with a young phenom quarterback, and what Nebraska does to support him. This is something else that we say a lot. This is one of the most fascinating off seasons ever. This truly will be, given not just what's going on with Nebraska, but everything externally around the game of college football, and then how that impacts Nebraska, especially as we get into July with the revenue share. Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that's why it's so crazy is it feels very frenzied because you do have the rev share coming down the pike in July, roster limits.
what that's going to look like. There's scuttlebutt out there right now that there's even, they're looking at eligibility for going to a straight 5 years for guys. I mean, even you're a baseball guy. I mean, you've got the JUCO thing now where like you get the JUCO year back. I mean, I would not want to be a college football coach right now with like everything that you have to plan for.
Yeah.
And like, you feel like you're on solid footing, and all of a sudden a guy comes in your office and is like, "Hey, this is my offer. I'm hitting the portal. You thought we were good yesterday. We're not good now." It's tough. It really is. The offseason it never stopped before, and it's spinning even faster now.
It's going to be crazy. I hope you get a chance to spend a little time with the family. That's been the only bad part about a bowl game in December is usually we all had the Christmas break off, not having to worry about a game. So you had a game to cover and in a roster to keep tabs on. But as I always did, anytime we would wrap up any of our conversations, because as people may or may not know with Michael Bruntz, much like myself, we're both big craft beer nerds. For New Year's Eve, let's just face it, it's amateur hour. You want to spend that with friends. You don't need to go out to the bars or anything like that. But I feel like you might have a private reserve, a type of beer that you're going to have just set aside for New Year's Eve. Is there anything in the hopper right now?
I've been sitting on a couple bottles of Brother Thelonious out of North Coast Brewing up in Bragg, California. So I've got that I'm getting to a certain age where I only need about one or two of those, and I'm probably I'm ready for the new year, I think. But that's on the ticket right now. I'll take any recommendations if you've got any, but that's probably the route I'm going.
Now I forget, are you a dark beer? Do you like stouts or even barrel aged beers?
I can get there. Not as much as I used to, but what do you got? What's your drug of choice right now?
So one I tried during the holidays and I grabbed a 4-pack of it, and that will come out tomorrow, is the barrel aged lager from Cross Train. And it's relatively light. I think it's 5.2. So it's usually your barrel age are going to be up there in the 8s or 9s, even greater. Okay. This one is, you open it up, it has a little hint of bourbon smell, a barrel smell, but it's a dark lager. It's very, very interesting, but tastes fantastic. And you can have more than one without feeling like you're going to need a nap or that you need to sit in one place because you're going to be a little loopy.
Yeah. You need a nap just to make the midnight, which I do anyways. I need like that about 10 p.m. nap to get through. So
yeah, we're trying to ring in the new year with some friends tomorrow night that just live 2 houses down, so we don't have to drive anywhere. Okay. But again, I think Jenny and I, the last few years, we've recognized East Coast midnight and not Central time zones. Like, all right,
is it midnight in London? Am I good here? Right. What time is it?
Well, Bruntzy, always appreciate being with you, my man. Happy holidays to you. Happy New Year to you and your family. I know we'll have to do this again, and hopefully we'll be watching some baseball together very soon too.
Yes. So it's 45 days.
Yeah.
Put it on the calendar.
Hell yeah. I cannot wait. All the best, my man.
You too. Thanks.